On January 15, 1919, a decision made years earlier, one nobody thought twice about, unleashed 3 million gallons of molasses onto a Boston street in seconds. Here's what matters: the men who built that storage tank didn't have the data we do now. They made a calculation based on what they knew, and that calculation cost 51 lives. The tank sat at 529 Commercial Street in the North End, right where the city's poorest neighborhoods pressed against the docks. Nobody who mattered lived there. That's part of the story too. The United States Industrial Alcohol Company built the tank in 1915. 4 years. That's how long it sat there before the flood. 4 years of winter freeze-thaw cycles, salt air from the harbor, metal under stress. The engineers chose to paint it brown to match the neighborhood, some said to hide it. But paint doesn't fix structural problems, it just covers them. January 15, 1919, a Wednesday. That morning the temperature in Boston sat around 41 degrees Fahrenheit. Molasses behaves differently in cold. It thickens, it becomes denser, heavier. The tank held 3 million gallons, about 14,000 tons of weight, pressing down on iron walls that were never designed for that kind of stress in winter conditions. At 12:30 in the afternoon, that's the time the witnesses agree on, workers heard a sound, not an explosion, a rumble, a groan, the kind of noise metal makes when it's about to fail. One worker said it sounded like a freight train. Another said like thunder in a tunnel. What they didn't know was that they had maybe 30 seconds left. The tank seemed split, not a small leak, a catastrophic rupture. The bottom gave way first. 2 million pounds of molasses, hot, viscous, moving at the speed of a breaking dam, surged onto the street below. The wave was 30 feet high. It traveled at 35 miles per hour. In seconds, it covered 2 city blocks. People on the street had no warning, no sirens, no time to run. A peddler selling produce, children walking home from school, dock workers, horses tied to carts. The molasses didn't drown them the way water does. It was thicker, stickier. It coated them, filled their lungs, trapped them in place like amber. 51 people died. 26 of them were never positively identified. Here's the decision nobody talks about. The company knew the tank was leaking. Months before January 1919, molasses had been seeping from the seams. They painted over it. They didn't reinforce the walls. They didn't drain it for inspection. Why? Because repairs cost money. Because the neighborhood was poor. Because the risk calculation said, statistically, probably nothing happens. The cleanup took months. Workers scrubbed the streets with salt water. Molasses soaked into wood, brick, soil. For years, people reported smelling it on hot days, a reminder that cost and negligence had a smell. The city sued the company. The trial lasted 2 years. The company eventually paid $600,000 in damages. Adjusted for inflation, that's roughly $11 million today. But here's what's forgotten. None of the executives went to prison. No one was charged criminally. The company paid a settlement and moved on. The families of the dead got money. Some got more than others, depending on what the courts decided their lives were worth. One widow received $5,000, another received $20,000. The difference was whether the judge thought her husband's job was valuable. The decision that mattered was made in 1915, the year they built the tank. The engineers had to choose, spend extra money on reinforced walls or save it. They chose to save it. They calculated that the risk was low. They were wrong. But they made that choice under pressure to be profitable, to be fast, to not over-engineer something for a poor neighborhood. What changed after 1919? Building codes got stricter. Inspections became mandatory. Tank design standards were rewritten. The molasses flood forced regulations that would prevent the next disaster. 51 deaths brought safety rules that protected thousands. That's the cold calculation of history. Sometimes catastrophe is the price of learning. The tank's ruins were torn down. The street was rebuilt. Boston moved on. But every January 15th, historians remember, not as a natural disaster, not as an accident, as a decision made by people who knew the risks and chose cheaper, as a reminder that negligence has a body count and it usually affects the people who matter least. Subscribe. Every week we uncover the decisions behind history's most catastrophic moments.